We know that the movie Encanto left us with a few questions and countless mysteries and heartbreaking stories. Just like the story of Bruno, the most mysterious character in this whole movie. But have you ever wondered what happened to Bruno? What's his backstory? Why did he have to isolate himself? Well, actually, my friends, Bruno's story is definitely the most tragic and sad of all. Encanto. So if you're interested in hearing it, get your tissues and your tears ready too. Bruno was born to the two most loving parents in the whole region of Colombia, Alma and Pedro, who had 3 children in total, with Bruno being the only son. The order of birth of these kids was first Julieta, then Pepa, and finally Bruno was born. Yes, Bruno was the baby of the family. At that time, he had the love and affection that a newborn deserves. But unfortunately for Bruno, a short time after his birth, that's when the tragedies began for his family. To begin with, his parents were forced to leave the town where they lived and where they had their great love story, because a horde of bad and violent men had arrived at their beloved village. These were dangerous people whose goal was to go after innocent people, taking advantage of all their kindness, just as they wanted to do with the Madrigal family. Those evil people were called the conquistadors, who chased most of the villagers, including Alma and Pedro. Because of the great love they had for each other and the birth of their children, Pedro decided to sacrifice himself for them. Bruno, his sisters, and his mother were left completely alone. All of this happened before any of them could crawl, even before they spoke their first words. It was for this reason that the little ones born to Alma and Pedro did not have the chance to have any memories of their beloved father. But in fact, this tragedy brought them one of the best things the Madrigal family could ever imagine. Since, thanks to Alma's pure love, Pedro's essence was transformed into a prayer, giving life to a candle that would bring them a magical little house, which gave these kids a new beginning. When Bruno turned 5 years old, he and his sisters received an enchanted room inside the little house, along with a powerful gift that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Julieta able to heal through food and prepare meals for anyone in need, Pepa able to control the weather with her emotions, and Bruno able to see the future. The girls were completely happy with these gifts, except for Bruno, who felt that his gift was more of a curse, especially because he knew all the bad things that would happen to others. Every time someone he cared about asked him about their future, he only saw tragedies. That made them get upset with him and blame him for the bad luck he brought them. Bruno's room had a tower that was based on the mountains of Colombia. So from a very young age, little Bruno was forced to be at the top of the tower, so he could watch over his family. And besides, with his gift, he also had the burden of warning them about the bad things they would have to avoid. With his visions, Bruno couldn't have complete control. But aside from the tragedies he had to see day after day, there were times when he wanted to take a break from it. But unfortunately for him, some of his visions could be involuntary, which is why he discovered Sodan before his sisters did. After a while of Bruno testing and seeing how his powers worked, he realized that things were turning into chaos. So Bruno made the tough decision to stop using his powers, since all the burden was becoming too exhausting for him. Everything Bruno did took a considerable amount of effort, especially when he was trying to see something specific. In fact, Bruno was supposed to faint, or he would become very weak when he completed a vision of the future. And as Bruno grew up, his mother forced him to use his powers once again, which made him feel more and more pressure each time, since his mother started bringing the villagers to Bruno so he could predict their future. Given the great love he had for his mother, Bruno had no choice but to follow her requests, using his power for other people. And it was at that moment that he began to develop his own ritual, so that he could concentrate on facing it and prepare himself for the dirty work, which was emotionally and physically exhausting for him. The ritual began to feel like a necessity for him, since his role of having to serve the people became a very stressful task for Bruno. Besides, he became more superstitious and just wanted luck to be on his side, since he wanted to bring good fortune to the people of the town, but especially to his beloved family. Dressed in a ceremonial suit, Bruno would surround himself with sand, and within his vision, he would hold the hands of the people whose future he was seeking. The vision would appear before Bruno's eyes when they turned green, and then that vision would be forged into glass. After completing his work, it was just a matter of waiting until that moment arrived in people's lives. And besides, they wouldn't be dissatisfied with what Bruno had seen.
It always happens.
Another problem that made Bruno feel uncomfortable with people is that he was a complete introvert. He didn't like being in front of people. This turned into social isolation, and people didn't help Bruno much with this, since Bruno's gift was often interpreted as something negative. So people didn't have a positive reaction to what happened in their lives and blamed Bruno for all the tragedies that happened to them. This led the villagers to turn against Bruno, believing that he only brought misfortune, and they thought that Bruno only watched their lives to create misery and chaos. What a nightmare for poor Bruno. He just wanted to help, but ended up being seen as the villain of the whole village.
He said half would die, and look.
No. To fill his emptiness, Bruno met two rats who became his companions. Since most of his life he felt forced to be alone, avoiding the villagers' hatred and dealing with his poor social skills. Even the poor Bruno's mother turned against him and sided with the villagers' attitude toward him. Alma's desire for her children to make the most of their powers created extremely high expectations, which ultimately turned out to be destructive. Not just for Bruno, but for the whole family in general. Alma just wanted peace and stability in her home and in her town. And Bruno's visions weren't always good, so this made her completely furious. All of this led her to despise Bruno. She, who was the one who forced Bruno to create visions, ended up hating him. She even later felt remorse for the great burden she put on her son. Grandma only started to see the worst in her little son, Bruno, creating a negative concept of him and directly associating him with everything bad that happened. So Bruno, because of this, became emotionally distant and later decided to leave home. In fact, this can be confirmed by the doors of the rooms. At first, when the first flashback of the three young children is shown, we can see that Bruno's door is in the middle of his sister's doors. And we also see that in the photos that Grandma has with all her descendants. Bruno's green door is between Julietta's and Peppa's, but later we see that Bruno's door is far away. Instead of being in the main area, his door is around the corner and has a staircase leading to it. Besides, we know that Casita can create stairs if needed. That's why I think that when Bruno started isolating himself within his own family, his door faded to a new location. That way, he would be even more isolated from the rest of his entire family. They all pushed him aside because no one understood him, not even his gift. The distance and rejection they felt was represented by the staircase that leads to his door. And his door kept getting farther and farther away, just as Bruno was feeling. This was also represented in the design, which gradually became more and more like an abandoned door. As time went by, the grandmother's grandchildren were born, which led to the discovery that the gift of one of them, Mirabelle, had failed in the process. Grandmother practically begged her son Bruno to look into the future to find out what could happen to her family's miracle. after 30 years of slowly condemning him and his gift. At that moment, when she was completely desperate, Bruno was the only one she could turn to so she could know what fate had in store for her family. Despite all this, Bruno agreed and witnessed the horrible news he had to give his mother. In his vision, the house and the magic were being destroyed little by little. With Mirabel in the middle, Bruno knew that Mirabel was the one who would shape the final destiny of his family. But the lack of faith in him made him realize that if he told his mother the truth, the family could go crazy. So, hoping to keep Mirabel safe, Bruno destroyed his vision and left behind his tower and his family as well. So he disappeared and gave up using his powers again. And this ended with the breaking of the connection between the house and his room, thus making the light on his door disappear completely, along with the love he had for his family. He built a house for himself inside the walls of the house, next to the kitchen, where he gathered food, furniture, and a considerable collection of rats. They were his real family during the time he was left with no one by his side. Long before Mirabel saw that the house and her family were falling apart, Bruno and the rats saw what was happening inside. Of course, Bruno wanted to be with his family again, and the only thing he could do at that moment was watch from afar. So, when the house started to fall apart, Bruno did everything he could from inside the walls to keep his family together at home. But besides all that, Bruno had to be patient for 10 long years. While he waited in the shadows for Mirabel, the girl he saved, to decide the fate of his family. Without a doubt, Bruno was never the villain of the family. At the end of the tragedy, and with his help, Bruno was finally accepted back by the Madrigal family. This was thanks to Mirabel and the new mindset of her mother, her sisters, and her new nieces. Bruno now uses his powers for those who truly need them. He always seeks advice from Mirabel, and people stop saying that they don't talk about Bruno. And that was the tragic and sad story of Bruno Madrigal. What do you all think? Wow, Bruno's story was really sad, but it's good that in the end he was accepted again by all his loved ones.